Welcome to Patty's Aquatics. So today I want to talk about dirty tanks, but just not all the good stuff about dirty tanks. In this one, this is going to be about some of the negatives about dirty tanks, especially for maybe new hobbyists first getting into this so they know what they're getting into when it comes to dirty tanks, especially in the beginning. Now, I feel as a creator with this subject, I need to show the good and the bad. It's my responsibility, in my opinion, to be able to show both. Now, I feel like I've done that. I do have pros and cons videos, which I can link above. I do have what to expect after setting them up videos, where I do show some of the good, but I do show some of the bad. But obviously a lot of my content when it comes to dirty tank is overwhelmingly good because, well, I love dirty tanks and I want you to as well. But that being said, there are other sides to it, and I did have a live stream with Cory from Aquarium Co-op just recently, which I will also put that link up above, and he brought up some good points about dirty tanks, about educating newcomers and things of that nature. So that's a step forward which I want to do today in this video, and I may do some more down the road too, is really showing both sides of it. Yes, it is good. I love dirty tanks. I love what they can do, and I love it, but it may not be for everybody. So I want to show some of those things and some of those struggles that you might have with it as well, so that someone new coming in knows and has all the knowledge and research that they have available to them to decide if that's what I want to do or not. So that's what we're going to do today, so stick around. All right, so to get started, like I said, if you're not familiar with my channel, I do keep a fish room full of dirted aquariums, and I obviously love them. I love them a lot, and I think they're very beneficial for me, but obviously in this hobby, there are so many different hobbyists and different interests. I think it's important to be able to understand something if it's something you're wanting to get into. In order to understand it, you need to know both sides. That's the good and the bad. So like I said, today we're going to talk about some of the things that could be considered bad and things to really consider if you are thinking about setting up a dirty tank for the first time. Now, to get started, the first thing we're going to talk about is that when you first set one of these things up, obviously it's going to be very hot. There's going to be lots of nutrients in that water column everywhere. And that's why it's always stated when you first set one of these aquariums up, it's very important to have lots of fast growing stem plants within those aquariums. Now, why is that? That's because it's going to help suck up a lot of those extra nutrients and try to make it less hot, so to speak. Now, another big point is floating plants. Floating plants are a big key thing as well. They're also going to help soak up lots of those extra nutrients. So it's very important to have that. Now, I myself have done it the wrong way a few times myself in my 75-gallon puffer tank. I didn't put a lot of stem plants to start with, and I battled for quite a while with that. Still am a little bit because of that. So like I said, you want to use lots and lots of fast-growing stem plants in the beginning. Now, you don't have to keep just them in the beginning. You can put swords or crypts and stuff like that in there, but you can also put them in later after your whole tank is kind of balanced and settled down, and remove some of those stem plants if you wish. I love to keep the stem plants in there because they grow continuously. You can continuously trim them. But like I said, it is very, very important that you do that, because if not, you will run into major issues, and that's going to lead us to the next part of it, and that is algae. Now with algae, because of that hot environment and all those excess nutrients, that is why the struggle with algae is there. And it's probably one of the biggest complaints I hear from newcomers getting into dirty tanks is that they have to battle algae, and it's one of their biggest complaints, like I mentioned. But with that, I know, like with Father Fish, for example, he has lots and lots of care sheets on his Discord and potentially his website too as well. I'm not 100% sure on that. But he has care sheets that break down everything from the beginning of starting one of these dirty tanks up all the way through, from how you do the substrate, how you want to put the plants in, how you want to set it up, when you want to put your fish in. And that's all great, and I think it's a great tool and resource to be able to use for these. But the problem is everyone does it differently. Unless you follow his thing to the key, using his additives in the soil and everything, things are going to be different. And that's the biggest thing I want to talk about here, are the variables. There are so many different variables from tank to tank. You know, I could follow that care sheet to the T, except I don't use his Father Fish additive. That could cause algae for me. Maybe you got more light. Maybe you have a different light that's more high intensity. Maybe you have lights on that are way too long. Maybe you're stocking more. Maybe you didn't put enough stem plants in there. So you know what I'm saying? There are so many different variables to it. So it's hard to follow just one care sheet, but it is a good thing to kind of fact check and go along with. But that being said, that's where algae can pop up too, because there are so many different variables that comes along with it. So you have to understand that you are going to battle with algae more than likely when it comes to these tanks when you first start up. Now, the biggest algae that I played with and had to deal with is more of like a hair algae that was really easy to remove. It usually sat at the top of my plants and I could pull it out, but I'd have to pull it out at least every few days to once a week to keep up with it, or you would get a big mat and clump of it. That was the worst of it, and typically within that first year it starts to settle down. So it really comes to patience, really to be able to have the patience to be able to sit through that period for everything in your tank to settle down. Now, there are other algae as well. I've had in my puffer tank, like I mentioned, because I didn't put enough stem plants in there to begin with, I battled with a different type of hair and string algae that really attached to my plants, and they stuck to it, and there was really no way just to easily pull them out. And that was a pain in the butt, I'm not going to lie, but that's the only tank I've had to deal with that type of algae. But just keep in mind that that is there and is more than likely something that you will have to battle with when you set one of these up within at least that first year range. It really, like I said, with the variables, every tank is different. It's hard for me to tell you at this month you will no longer deal with algae, because there's no way to really do that, because everyone's tanks are different, their lights are different, and like I mentioned. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So to talk about patience again, that was part of the algae part of it. That's going to be part of this part of it as well, and that's with cloudy water. Now, for me, whenever I set up one of these dirted tanks, I typically get cloudy water within the first 2 to 3 months of setting it up. And it's one of those things where you have to have patience. You have to be able to have patience to be able to sit and ride it out, because there really is no way to just magically make it go away. Water changes aren't going to help it. You can use UV sterilizers, but if your tank isn't ready to be done with it, it's not going to be done with it and it will come back. Now, why do you get the cloudy water? Well, there's a few reasons in my opinion. I think it's probably also added with that hot tank and all those excess nutrients that are within your aquarium. Now, I don't use filtration, so maybe it's more people that don't use filtration. Now, I'm not 100% sure on that. So if you run dirted tanks and you run it with filtration and you haven't experienced cloudy water, let me know in the comments. I'd be kind of interested on that aspect of it. But again, cloudy water for me is something that pops up in all my aquariums. Well, at least 90% of them. I've had 1 or 2 that haven't, surprisingly, but typically it's those things where you just gotta wait it out. I'm battling it right now in my 20-gallon tank that has my Medaka rice fish in. It absolutely sucks. I hate not being able to see things, but it's one of those things where overnight turns crystal clear. Had it with my Oscar tank as well. They can last anywhere from a couple weeks to a few months. My Oscar tank lasted about 3 months. It was unbearable trying not to be able to get frustrated with it, but there's nothing you can do about it but just wait it out and wait for it to clear. And like I said, one day overnight, it just magically goes away. So the next part I want to talk about really is the importance of research and planning when it comes to these dirted tanks, because the truth is that there are limitations to what you can do with these aquariums. Now, to start off with, let's talk about fish. Now, you can't just throw any type of fish in here like cichlid wise and expect them not to dig into the substrate without hitting that dirt layer. Now, there are ways around it, and as long as you do research and planning, that can work. Now, for instance, I have a Fahaka puffer and an Oscar cichlid, both in dirted aquariums, and they're both running successfully. But that again, I did my research and I planned it out for it to be successful. Like with my Fahaka puffer, I know they like to dig in the sand. So what I did is I put a deeper sand substrate on top of my dirt. I have about 4 to 5 inches of sand, knowing that way if it decides to dig, it's not going to hit that dirt layer. Now with the Oscar cichlid, same thing. I did my research. I put my dirt layer, a little bit of sand cap. I put egg crate on there with more sand. That way if the Oscar decides to dig down, it's not going to reach that soil level. So there are ways around things as long as you do your planning and you do your research. And that's why it's important really with anything you do in this hobby, but especially with these dirted tanks. So you can't just set up a normal dirted tank like one of these up here and throw in some convicts or cichlids of that nature and expect them not to dig in the substrate. So you really need to really pre-plan all of that. Now, the other thing I want to talk about really are plants themselves. You need to plan out the plants you plan on putting in your aquariums as well. Like I said in the beginning, those Stem plants are very important, but if you decide to put other plants like Amazon swords or crypts or things like that nature, you need to understand the size that they get, how big they can get, and where you're going to place them. Now that's going to be the biggest difference between dirted tanks and other type of tanks like sand and just gravel. You put an Amazon sword in there, for instance, and that's what happened in one of my tanks up here, which I'll show some clips. I put an Amazon sword in and it grew so large that it was overtaking the entire tank, and I wanted to get rid of it and take it out. Well, by doing so, it created a big, black, muddy mess within my aquarium. Now, with a sand or just gravel aquarium, yes, you can easily pull them out. No worry, no harm, no foul. But with this, it creates a big mess and a big storm to really play with. So it's very important to know and do your research again with plants to know what type of plants you're putting in, how big do they get, and where you want to place them to begin with so that you don't have to pull them out later. Now, with other plants, I know like the biggest complaint is pulling plants out from your dirted aquariums can pull up dirt into your water column as well, even if they're not big Amazon swords. There are some ways around that as well. I find it very easy with sand caps is to be able to grab the plant by the base. Now I have this in some videos, and you just slowly pull it out in a circular motion, then that sand will kind of backfill into that hole, and you can typically pull them out. Now with a big plant, like an Amazon sword, for instance, I don't think that's really going to be possible because their root system is going to be so large. It's really going to be hard to do. So just keep that things in mind with plants as well, because there are definitely different size plants, and you don't want to put a big Amazon sword in the very front because it's just you're going to be paying for it later when you want to move it. So that's two parts, fish and plants. Now, what about if you want to change things up in the future? That's another thing. Once you set up a dirted tank, you can't just rip everything out of there and put things differently, because you're going to, again, create a big mess within your aquarium compared to a sand or gravel type aquarium where you can just pull things out and move things around. Dirted tanks, when you set them up, they're there for long-term use. You want to put them in there and pre-plan, like I said, map everything out where you want them and let them grow in, so you really don't have to pull things out of the substrate. Besides, maybe like for me, I have dwarf Sagittaria that likes to run towards the front. I'll pull them out and replant them in the back so things grow thicker in the back. So it really is a very important thing for planning and research when it comes to these dirted tanks. Really for any tank, but for dirted tanks especially, because there are so many limitations and variables that can cause you a lot of trouble if you don't. Now, the last point I want to bring up, it's something that Cory did bring up in that live stream, is that he feels that dirted tanks sometimes can be sold as easy to beginners. Now, I can't disagree with him. Now, for someone like myself who has dealt with and played with the live aquarium plants for many years before I got into dirted tanks, yeah, it's easy for me. I know what to expect from plants. But if you're a newcomer into the hobby, or someone that has never used or had a live aquarium plants in your aquariums before, this 100% could be overwhelming for somebody with all those excess nutrients in that hot aquarium. There's lots of variables and lots of things that could really get them in over their heads. Now, like I mentioned earlier too, Father Fish does have those care sheets, which is a great tool for somebody getting into this for the first time, knowing, kind of using it as a checklist to try to figure out down the road. But that being said, I would highly recommend that someone, if you're just getting into the hobby or have never used live aquarium plants, try setting up just a planted tank to begin with, maybe with just sand or a gravel substrate, and really understanding what the plants are, really understanding how they work and what to expect from them before you deep dive into one of these dirted aquariums. Now, that being said, if it's something that still interests you and you want to set up one of these tanks for the first time and have never used live aquarium plants, use those care sheets from Father Fish. Use his advice, use advice from others like myself and other people online. Father Fish Discord, there's lots of people with lots of great information on there. Just do your research, do your planning, and be open to listening and understanding, but most importantly, have patience, because there's lots of things within these dirted tanks that really you need to have patience for, and know that these are long-term tanks. They're not just some tanks you're going to quickly set up and they're going to look perfect and awesome. You have to sit through a few things in order for it to get that progression to that beautiful, lush and green tank that you're looking for. So, like I said, I think it's very important to show both sides of these dirted tanks, not only the good, but also some of the potential bad, so everyone has all the information that they want or need heading into one of these tanks, so they don't get overwhelmed and they know what to expect. So that being said, I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did and you're not subscribed already to my channel, hit that subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it. I'm also offering memberships to my channel, so hit that join button if it interests you. And always remember to think outside the box and take a step back into nature. I hope to see you next time here at Patty's Aquatics.